Welcome to the Leading with Empathy podcast. Today, my guest is Claire McCaffery, who's the head of HR for Accenture in the ANZ region. And Claire is such a lovely person. She shares so much of her journey, some of the challenges of being a HR professional in this professional services area, which is such a diverse and challenging landscape to work in. We dive into a whole bunch of things, particularly how Claire made the journey from being a chemist and science background into really following her passion for people, and then really helping to get the most out of organisations where they're really supporting their people to really join together and create a powerful culture. This is a fascinating chat, particularly if you're a HR professional yourself. You'll get a lot from the wisdom of Claire McCaffery. So please enjoy. Hello, Claire. Welcome. Thanks for coming onto the podcast, and so good to see you again.
Hey, Daniel. Nice to see you.
Look, maybe if we could just start off with, can you just share a little bit about, I guess, your role and what you do at Accenture and how you got there?
Yeah, it's a long story. So my role, I lead, I'm the head of HR for Accenture ANZ, which is Australia and New Zealand. I've been in Accenture for about 20 years, so a long time. Started off, I think I've actually done quite, how do you say, unusual HR roles. In the UK before I came to Australia, and I wasn't working for Accenture, I was working for IBM actually as a grad, and I actually started getting into, again, unusual roles quite early. I was involved with outsourcing, acquisitions, and things like that, and from the HR component of that. So quite early on, I got exposed to very different types of HR, if you like, around change management, communication, consultation, working with unions and things like that. And so when I came to Australia 26 years ago, had a bit of a break actually, but when I did actually come back to work and started working for Accenture, again, I hadn't really had that real traditional HR background. I'm a chemist actually. My degree was in chemistry. I started off as a programmer in IBM, moved into HR because I found programming wasn't for me, didn't align with my strengths. It was quite opportunistic actually moving into HR. This is actually a really important point for people, I think, when they're thinking about what they want to do, and for organizations, because I actually went to my manager and said, I'm leaving. And my manager at the time could have said, that's a shame, goodbye. But they said, well, what is it you want to do? What are you passionate about? And I said, well, I really like working with people. I've done some, part-time work with HR when I was at uni. And they were like, oh, well, there's an opportunity to retrain. Would you like to do it? Sponsor me, etc. So rest is history. So I think that those moments are really important. Like I had every intention to leave and I didn't. I stayed and I, learnt my HR trade there. Then coming to Accenture, again, having very different background, I guess, to maybe traditional, where you're going in and work and starting it, sort of doing administration and working up. I actually started from the business and kind of came across, which was really interesting because it brings a different perspective.
Mm.
And then when I started Accenture, I actually started doing a part-time role, which was, we used to own a recruiting company, actually, diversity. And I had 2 kids at the time. That suited me, again, really, really nicely, and learned lots of different things. But I was very familiar with all the leaders in Accenture, and they were setting up this HR shared service center, and they asked me, would I be interested in helping? So again, it was quite different, an HR program, which was more of a change management program. So we set this service center up in China, in Dalian in China. I spent a number of years like flying into China, going to Japan, going around Asia, talking to people, trying to get them comfort in the transition of what we were doing, as we were moving work locally. And it was really fascinating time, new processes, new technology, new people. And so again, it was a lot around change management and less about the traditional HR, like in terms of, HR business partners. So my career background is, I guess, a little bit different to many HR practitioners. But I started in Accenture, then getting into some more of those traditional, focus areas such as talent strategy. So I got, again, I think most of my opportunities in my career, somebody's come and said to me, "Hey, Claire, would you like to?" And I'm like, and it's those opportunities that come along. I always say to people, if an opportunity comes along, just give it a go, because often I've thought, I don't know anything about that.
But I'm interested in why HR, and let me preface the question from the fact that whether it's in consulting or manufacturing or even programming at some of the IBM. There's two truths that I always find with big organizations. People are the most important asset, and HR is often one of the more maligned areas that people, see and have certain opinions about. I shouldn't say. But what attracted you to sort of the HR side of the organization, coming from sort of a chemist and software background? What about, you said you liked people. Why? What about people did you like?
Just find people fascinating, and it's interesting. I really enjoy getting to know people, understanding how they tick. And what I found I didn't enjoy about being a programmer was I sat in front of a screen all day, not talking to anybody, and it just didn't suit me. I've done my Gallup strength. I love strengths. My top two strengths, individualization and relator, which is all about adapting to different people and, building relationships. So, that's what appealed to me, because it was actually thinking about how you can make someone's life a little bit better. And I know HR is often maligned, but to be honest, most people, and I've got quite a big team, when you talk to them, they come into this industry because they actually do deeply care about people and they're trying to create something better. And I truly believe that. Like, yes, you have to do lots of things which are not pleasant, and many people wouldn't want to do, such as when you have to let people go, which is awful. But actually, a lot of when you speak to people, they really want to help develop people, help grow people. They get a kick out of it. I was speaking to a very senior person this morning who's leaving the firm, and I'm just helping him with some simple things, but it just gives me a bit of purpose. I actually helping someone leave the company in a positive way. He's choosing to leave, but it's just still it's a very important time. And so those really important critical times in your life, in your career. I mean, we have situations where people going through very difficult situations outside work, they might have found out they've got cancer or something like that, and actually the being able to lean into that and support people through some of that and help people and say, well, we've got this support network here, you can go here, you can get this support from our people. I think that's really gives something, you really feel like you're actually making a difference in somebody's life. So I do hear the cynicism, but personally, and I think with most of my team, people generally do care and do want to help.
Yeah, and look, I think caring about people is one of those important things. If we want the best out of people, then we've got to care about them. We've got to support them, and like you said, there's those emotional peak times, isn't there? The things happen in my career or in my life or on a project or whatever it might be, that if I have someone there who can care about me, then it can actually make a huge difference.
Yeah, and caring isn't all about being nice all the time. It's actually, you know, having the right conversations with people. And actually, sometimes, and I know this is something probably close to your heart, sometimes being real with people and saying, actually, this isn't working out. And, what else could you do? And it's interesting when you speak to people who have transitioned or moved on to something else, often they're really grateful for someone who's given them had that conversation, honest conversation, to say, actually, there's a bit of a mismatch here. What else would you like to do? A bit like my own mismatch that I realized myself, that I
Yep.
wasn't born for programming. It wasn't for me. I get some people love it, but just wasn't for me. So I think playing to your strengths and recognizing and having someone who's brave enough to tell you that or help you through that, I think is important. So yeah, it's just trying to find, support people as they go through some of those transitions,
Mhm.
which is
Yeah. I think that's a really important point, and one that people often don't concentrate on enough, which is if someone's struggling, if someone doesn't like the work, if someone's not in a good place with their work environment, just dragging them through that is not actually empathy at all. It's often quite cruel, and it sets them up for, if anyone has ever been in a role where they weren't being successful, it really dampens your confidence. It
Mm.
impacts on your ability to find another job. It has huge consequences. And again, I think that's the role, isn't it, of HR to how do we support those people through whatever those transitions might look like?
Exactly right. So it's, understanding what skills you have, I mean, Ellen, who's our global CHO, is just transitioning or just leaving herself, now retiring after many years. And she talks about the intersection of what is it you're good at and what is it you're passionate about. Like, and when that comes together, it's like this perfect storm, which works really well. It's like finding those two things and thinking if you love doing something and then you're actually really good at it together. I think there's a really good model they use in Japan around purpose, which talks about that, and I love that. I love the fact that we can't enjoy everything you're doing all the time, but you've got to have some sort of bent for it, interest in it. You've got to get something out of it. And for me, as I say, for me, it's those little things. It's having those, because I've got relay there and individualization. Those interactions where you feel like you're actually making a bit of a difference for somebody. That to me is and then it can be even broader than that. It's like, well, what are some of the broader things we can do more generally for the organization? And that's what I like when people say, well, why do you want to do your current role? Because I feel like, I love those individual interactions, but if I can make a difference at a broader level, if I can influence some things we're doing, like bring in a new policy or change something, or that's actually makes you feel really good. Actually, I actually help to influence that and help to make it better from lots of people. So that's what gets me excited.
Yeah, I'd love to ask you about policy because it's one of those things that it can be a bit of a double-edged sword in that by their very nature, policies are often fairly black and white. They sort of set fairly objective boundaries around certain decisions, but then in the real world, those boundaries don't often fit. And an example I had working with a client many years ago now, they had a bereavement policy that had auntie was excluded from the policy, and but if someone in your direct family passed away, you had this bereavement leave you get access. But this gentleman, his auntie had raised him because his parents had died when he was very young. And so when his auntie passed away, the question was, well, should they get the leave or shouldn't they? And the policy clearly says no, but there's a feeling the answer should be yes. What from a HR perspective, how do you think about those situations, and how do you think about sort of I guess, the leadership overlay that needs to happen sometimes of these situations that are complex?
And, I totally agree with you. A policy is a framework which helps you, decision-making framework, basically. But there are situations where you need to adapt the policy. And actually, sometimes those individual situations make you change the whole policy itself because you realize it's outdated, it needs to evolve. And we've done that with many of our policies. Our policies have evolved over time because things are changing, right? Like, so, even things like parental leave, when we started doing parental leave, it was mainly for women. Now it's parental leave for all parents, and it's the same. And whether you're a man, woman, or you don't identify as either, like it's the same. And so we've evolved that because the world's evolved. So I think some of those moments that matter when something, you have to assess it. And that's why the benefit of HR. So leaders will come to us and say, I've got this situation, and it happens all the time. I've got a situation, it's really tricky, this person's going through this, but then, that's when you have to take all the facts. And that's why I love it with my individualization, say, okay, what's the context? In this situation, this makes sense to do this. And of course, you need to have that lens of being fair, which is always hard. That individualization versus consistency. Like, if I'm give this person this, do I then give everybody else it? But you've got to think about the context. And so it's just a starting point really for people to help them make those decisions. But all the time, HR actually advise leaders on helping them think through some of those things and some of those exceptions. So yeah.
I want to explore that relationship as well because I've heard in big organizations people say, well, HR says this or the policy says this. And so they use that almost as a way of saying there's no discussion or debate and everything's very black and white. Or sometimes they'll say, oh, HR, they don't understand the business, they've lost touch. I want to ask you about how do you get this relationship better between business and leaders, HR, and to try and I guess avoid some of those pitfalls that I don't know if you've seen those before, but I've certainly encountered them in the past.
Yeah, look, and sometimes it's easy to use HR as an excuse to as a problem, isn't it? It's all HR's fault. Obviously, organizational decisions are not just made by HR. There's big decisions, even things like redundancies or pay, or I think they're an organizational decision based on many things like profitability. Um, but you're right. Sometimes it's like, oh well, it's a HR or it's the police or it's the process, and um, so how do you overcome that? Well, I think you overcome it by building relationships with business leads and understanding the business, and listening to those scenarios and listening to the situation. Like something which, if you just look at it, as you say, in black and white, you might go, well, yeah, I'm not going to approve that. But when you actually talk through the situation, say, well, actually, this is a really important client, or this is happening with this is a very unusual situation, like the one you talked about with the auntie. Then you can make those decisions, and actually, the more you do that, it builds trust, I guess. So the more that you can help and support, but also, actually, I think leaders like to be challenged as well, because sometimes, leaders are very busy. They don't always know the right answer. So being able to say, well, yeah, you could do this. However, this might happen if you did, and actually walk through that rather than just say no. Sometimes it's saying no, but giving the context about why. And, I find that people find that very helpful, like, especially from it might be a legal or other perspective, say, well, we could do this, but the implications could be that this could happen. Are you open to that? Are you aware of that? And often they're not, because that's not their main job. Their main job is to run the business. So I think it's partnering, which doesn't always mean agreeing, but it's actually listening, providing context, and then bringing that expertise in that we have to give a slightly different perspective. And sometimes we align and sometimes we won't, but that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's all right. That the business partnering perspective is such an important one, and it's not just HR and the business; it's how HR and all different functions partner. Because if I think about looking at, say, the Banking Royal Commission or some of these situations that we've seen in the past, when we're talking about something like conduct risk. Um, Conduct sits across, is that a risk problem? Is that a leadership problem? Is that a HR problem? Is it operational? Is it systems and processes? And I think the answer is yes, it's all of those things.
Those
So,
things, yeah.
how do you make sure that you get that right information, or that all these parties come together effectively to have better conversations around that?
Well, I mean, there's different ways of doing that. If you think about conduct for a start. There's some legislation around it. There's some, regulations around it. We have our own internal policies around it. There's how it lands on the ground. So as you say, it's a whole combination of things. How do we ensure that we get that right? But first of all, I think it starts with leadership. So, what's really important, and especially that the regulations are changing, especially in Australia right now. And we're getting a lot of focus on psychosocial risks, on proactive duty. So we are having to be, and I think it's great, because we're having to be not just, oh, I'll just wait till something happens and then I'll try and fix it. To try and think about, well, what are some of the things that we can anticipate might happen? And in order to do that, we need to get leadership really on board. So it's starting with the leaders and, at the broader sense, because if our leaders of people are not aware, are not educated, are not trained, or not noticing, then how are they going? Really the culture is how everybody behaves, and across the organization. That's what creates culture. So if they are not being given the right support and training around that, then they're not going to necessarily exhibit the right behaviors. So it starts with the top, absolutely, and then it's got to be broad. So that's what we try and do. We're trying to infuse these discussions, and we're having sessions with our leaders right now called Conduct Counts, which is actually talking about scenarios, but then also brainstorming with them and having conversations and showing scenarios, saying, well, how would you approach that? And what are some things that you might do? And what could we do differently? And getting them to think practically, on the ground, so that they can sort of have that proactive approach. So look, it's not easy. We're a big organization. We're a matrix organization. There's lots of pieces to it. But I do really think that the framework that the government are providing is actually a really good framework, because it actually gives us some structure around, and also it really amps up the importance. Like, this is not just important because it is really important for people, like to create psychologically safe workplaces and engaged workplaces, but actually we're actually required to do it. And so this is actually it really amps up the importance of it, and I think it's really helpful personally.
Yeah, and look, I think for organizations like yours, you've got a large workforce, but also one that's often spread out, embedded in client sites. And I'm interested in this idea of culture and conduct because, again, the thing that might go wrong can happen so far away from that central head office, right? And you want to have two things, I guess. One is people make the right decisions way out there and do it in the Accenture way, but also be flexible enough to adapt to those complex scenarios that they're embedded in these. How do you maintain that sort of sense of the Accenture way to do things when people are really spread out and not that close to, I guess, the mothership sometimes?
Look, it's not easy, and it's become more difficult with post COVID, and it's something I think most companies are recognizing, that, when everyone's together, it's easier to see and role model somebody because you're in the same room with them and you're observing their behavior. And it's can be more difficult in a hybrid organization. But we've been hybrid, to be honest, for a long time, even before COVID. We are a matrix organization, we're a global organization. We're used to doing calls different times. And so I think, again, it comes back to making sure that the leaders understand the culture and that they can translate that, cascade that to the next level. So irrespective of where they are, if you've got people who understand, Accenture values, the conduct, then they are the people who are going to step in, who are going to, cascade that with their teams. So what we try and doing is focusing on teams and team engagement and health and safety in teams. So, for instance, one of the things that we're doing is we've rolled out like this wellbeing charter for teams. We also have we partner with Gallup, and we use the Q12, which is engagement survey, which you use it at team level. But you can also look at strengths. So giving all these tools and measurements, in a way, it helps us understand where the problems are as well, because when we look at engagement, we look at it across the patch. We also do other surveys actually across the patch, and that helps us understand any issues, any things that we might need to tweak. But it also brings a conversation around, what do we need to do more of. But it is very different. I mean, we've got people working on remote fly in, fly out in Western Australia. We've got people working in the centre of Melbourne. It's very diverse, but ultimately, I think our structures and processes and our education training is quite extensive, especially when you come into Accenture, going through what Accenture is. But really, I think where you learn is from others. So it's actually helping and having people mentoring and guiding and going back to that performance process. It's like setting priorities and saying, this is what we want to achieve. And one of the things that we ask of all of our people is set priorities. But we also look at not just impact but behavior. So you're going to get measured on it. So you better understand,
Yeah.
you better understand what is important around, conduct, etc. So yeah,
what what those expectations are,
exactly.
and where
Yeah,
what does good, and this is a really important piece, right? Which is um, you can put in all the processes and systems and policies, but people need to make good decisions, and
that's
those
right.
decisions happen in those moments. And this is where, as you sort of alluded to, leadership becomes such a critical piece. The support, the being close, having those trusted relationships. If I do something that isn't right, will I speak up about it? Will I talk about it? Will I seek advice? Do I try and hide it? Those things
Yeah.
come a lot down to leadership. I'm interested in the leadership side because you've got a lot of people who, I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying this, are very technically proficient and have a lot of technical expertise in specific sectors. And having worked in management consulting in the past, I've worked with a lot of people who, like I had a degree in maths myself, and now they have to step up at some point and start to lead people. And I'm interested in what are some of the things you see as the important points or the challenges or the leaps that need to be made when we're going from that sort of technical, I'm the best at my job, to now I'm leading a group of people and I've got to do something different. What are some of those things that you think are important in that transition?
Yeah, it can be a difficult transition, as you say. Like you come in and you're an expert and you're seen as the go-to person, and then suddenly you've got a team of 10 people. And um, yeah, I think, to be honest, it's being open and curious. Yeah, some people honestly just do not enjoy managing people. They just don't enjoy it. I think if you can be open around it, though, you can start to see the benefits of doing it. And it's actually, yes, it brings more complications to your life. Um, but I think it's a bit of a journey, and we've got a number of things that we do to help people do that transition. So actually I'm faculty for we have a senior manager conference this week, and we have conferences for every level. It's to help develop the different skills, so from an analyst, we expect something different out of a consultant. And when you get to an executive level, this is when you start leading other people. Then we start bringing conversations around, how do you create psychological safety? How do you, lead and engage teams? And they start teaching. It's like anything, if you've never done it, you have to learn. And like you have, there's training, but then you have to kind of learn on the job as well. And the best way to learn is actually do it, right? To be honest. So bringing some of that in, supporting people with also learning from others as well, which is where I think that mentorship and that leadership is really important, because it's not going to be something you learn overnight. And some people really take to it and really, as I say, are curious and open to it, and other people less so. So I think it's attitude is important. Like I think that's not to say that's going to be, you somebody who loves technology and doing what they love, you know, doesn't mean they can't do that anymore, but just extending that. So it's not, I don't see it as a or, it's more of an and, like
Mm.
extending that. And when we do have slightly different pathways, we do have some pathways which are a bit more technical, less of a team. But we have a very broad range of people in Accenture, to be honest. And you're like,
Mm.
it's not just technology. We have creatives, we have consulting, we have industry, we have a very broad range of people. And I think I think the critical thing is we're a people business. So you have to be able to manage people.
Yeah, and that's a really important piece that you've got to bring some really diverse people around the table, and even before when you were mentioning being that business partner, that's about finance people and risk people and HR people and strategy, all these different types of personalities coming together. And you described your personality strengths. How do you go about having those, I'll call them robust discussions with people who are vastly different to you, and how do you sort of make sure that you're getting the most out of that conversation?
I think we describe it as a healthy tension. Like it's also from a matrix perspective. We're very matrix. We've got lots of different parts of the organization. And I actually, maybe it's because of my individualization, love the fact that we've got so many different diverse people, because it just brings different perspectives and different ways of thinking. And, we've done lots of acquisitions over the years, and that's really added to our culture, but like we haven't tried to, take away our culture. It's sort of additive to and it's sort of merged with our culture. And we brought in more design organizations, and that has changed the way we approach with clients. For instance, we do more design thinking, more creative work. So it's actually really interesting that it does cause tension, of course, but actually that you need a bit of, I always say, like with all growth comes pain. You need a bit of tension to shift things, to make you think differently. So how do you do it? Well, through robust conversations, obviously, and we have an executive committee which brings all of those leaders together and talks about some of those things. And, I think in every single organization around the world, you're going to have people with different perspectives in leadership. That's the whole point, isn't it? Like what you don't want is groupthink. You don't want just, oh, well, that's just the way we do it. You want people with different perspectives who can challenge and go, actually, from our perspective, this is very different to the way you see things. So I don't know. I actually like the challenge, the fact that it's bringing those different thoughts together.
Yeah, and look, so this is a hard question potentially, but one of the things that often people will say, particularly in a leadership team, is we have to disagree, we have to have those robust conversations, but then at some point we have to make a decision and all commit. And I hear that said a lot. I think I've said it a number of times. The thing I always worry about is how do we do that? Because it's easy to say we're going to disagree, then fully commit. But I don't know if that always necessarily happens. How do you go about, maybe when you're in a situation where the decision's made, it wasn't the one you'd sort of been sort of thinking about or fighting for potentially. How do you go about having that commitment after that fact?
Yeah, I mean, it is sometimes difficult. You're not going to agree with everything the company does, right? Like that's just a reality. But I think you've got to think about, and I try and take a positive perspective. Okay, how can we take this situation and make it a positive thing? Like, what can we do? Well, how can we get the best out of this? What can I influence out of this? Like you can't control everything, but you can influence some things. So even if you don't like the situation, how can you make that situation better? Or how can you, if you're doing some transition, how can you make those transitions more positive? So I guess I try and look at it through that lens. Like you're not going to agree with everybody. Of course you're not. You're going to have to do things that sometimes you don't agree with, and that's just being in any organization, right? But it's how you do it, I think, is important. And try and bring people on the journey.
Yeah, and how you communicate it, right? I've
Yeah,
seen people go, "Well, I didn't agree with this, but we have to do it," and then they wonder why their teams aren't very engaged and
yeah,
that negative. And that's part of being a leader, isn't it? Sometimes it's saying, "Look, we have to get the right outcome. What's the best positive way I can move
yeah,
forward?"
yeah. And these are not easy things to do, are they? But yeah, it absolutely is trying to bring people along with you. So
Fantastic. Look, I've got some empathy card questions. So these are just little questions that I often take to conferences and leave them on tables, and people can ask each other to start a bit of a conversation. Here's one. What was the last situation at work that really frustrated you?
oh God. um it's probably when people ask things of you without understanding your perspective. So it's, the situation where you just said, this is actually, it's kind of funny because it kind of goes back to the thing about process. This is the way it needs to be done. And this happened, this is your what you're getting. This is what you need to do. Because I like to change things. I don't like to just be told this is it. You've got no input into it. And so um, it's that sort of thing that is when someone's not looking at from your perspective and just giving you a job to do, which doesn't think about the needs of the team. So that's a specific situation I can think about, yeah, which happens
And
quite.
it sort of goes back to, I think this is one of the things that both sides of the relationship need to think about. When we have a business partnering relationship, we're meant to be partnering with each other. I think it's not a you're here to serve us and
That's
we're
right.
the yeah. So that's a really important one. Who's someone you really admire and why?
Good question. Um, by lots of people. I mean, the classic probably is Brené Brown, just because I just think she's just says what she's really frank, she's really transparent, she's really got incredible ideas. She's really challenges your thinking. So I think, yeah, she's someone that I think is amazing, and I like thought leaders, if you like. I like to think about things differently, and yeah, she's someone I would say.
And very humble, and she's got a great deal of that humility you mentioned earlier, that she
Yeah.
doesn't know it all, she doesn't claim to know it all, and is that curious sort of spirit. I think I'd agree with that one. What about defining success? How do you define success?
A good question. These are like coaching questions. I'm a coach also, by the way.
That's right.
uh, how do I find a success? I guess it depends on what it is, doesn't it? Like it's hard to say how you define success. Depending, it's got to be contextual. I mean, for me, success is when you feel you've achieved something and you've done it in a way which is a positive thing. Like you're feeling like there's some purpose behind it. You've actually done something which for the greater good, where you've worked well with people to achieve it. Like I don't think success is just bulldozing and just going, I'm doing it because I want to do it. Like even if you achieved an objective, if you haven't done that in a constructive, collaborative way, then to me that's not success. So it's like, you know, feeling like you're making a difference in a positive way.
Mm. And I think that's a really key tenet of leadership, which is, are we getting to the right outcome? Are we moving
Mm,
us all forward in the right way? And sometimes we focus so much on getting a result that we sort of win the battle and lose the war quite
that's
often.
right.
And
Yes,
it's sad, isn't it?
it is, because you're very focused on a metric or a task, or that you forget about what the bigger picture is of what you're trying to achieve. And yeah.
I funnily enough see that sometimes with culture surveys and engagement surveys, that people say, "Oh, we need to get a good score," rather than actually care about having a good
Mm.
culture. And it's a very topical one.
Mm.
Final question: who do you want to thank for some way that they've influenced or helped you, that maybe you haven't thanked them, or maybe you might have, but who's someone who's had an influence? It might be small or large, might be recent or in the past, that you'd like to call out and thank today.
Wow, that's a big one. Probably that first manager that I went to. And the funny thing is, I don't even remember his name now, but he really had a big impact because he completely changed my career. Like I would have been doing something completely different. I was going to go and retrain and do something completely different. And he sort of said, just ask the right question at the right time, and got me. So probably him. And then I think the obvious ones, my parents were very incredibly supportive in all of us and whatever we wanted to do. And they weren't like, you need to do a certain thing. My mum was all about diversity, and before diversity was a word, and I learned so much from her. And my dad was just a really great sort of role model. So just, yeah, my parents for sure, because they just gave me that safe. It's interesting, when I was a chemist, not many women were chemists. I didn't ever really think about, oh, is there is there a challenge because I'm a woman? I never thought about it because of my parents. even though in their generation they probably did have to worry about that, but I never worried about it because it didn't even cross my mind, because I guess the way they brought me up.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I think it's an important lesson for people to take away, which is the influence we have on people can be profound, and
Mm,
even in tiny moments. That there's a leader that you just described who, for them it might have been a fleeting conversation, but it could have also been something that they just didn't have. It would have been much easier for them to potentially say, "Oh, well, fine, see you later." But
mm,
taking those little moments with people can have a huge difference, and asking the right questions can be so impactful.
absolutely.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Claire. It's been lovely chatting with you, and I'm really always impressed by the great work that good people at Accenture do, and clearly having you in their corner always makes it easier for them.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel.